Hello and welcome to the Nature Garden podcast with me, Carl Steinson, and the Weekending Show team from Lionheart Radio. Thanks for joining us on a canny wee wander down the garden path and country lane with the birds and the bees and the flowers and trees. In this episode, as October passes its magical baton on to November, Tom Pattinson's taking a trip into the kaleidoscope of colours and toffee apple smells in the garden. And he's also joining forces with naturalist David Mizejewski from the National Wildlife Federation in the USA on why it's so important to leave the leaves. And Tom Cadwallender's looking at one of the wonders of the natural world, the staggering journeys of migrating birds. And he's also checking out the importance of our urban gardens and green spaces as habitats. Plus some top tips for the garden from Tom P. All coming up on the Nature Garden podcast. Hello. Yes, autumn's magnificent colour change and the leaf fall are at a crescendo. And Tom Pattinson is out and about looking at some of his favourite trees. Hello, Tom. How's it going?
Hello. Most important thing I have to report, from a gardening point of view, and exciting of course, is the change in colour of deciduous trees and shrubs, the leaves. It's continuing throughout the county, and with a bit of luck and the recent weather, which is warmish during the day and cool in the evening but not too cold, it will continue. The leaves will hold on, and then of course they fall. Why do they fall? Because the plants are perennial, of course, trees and shrubs in this case, and they're going to have their late winter sleep, which we call a dormancy. So we're enjoying this spectacle throughout the county, way over to the west by the Roman Wall, along country lanes. It's difficult to keep your mind on driving the car because it's so distracting, the gorgeous colours changing in the trees. And it's in parks and gardens. We have Hulme Park, about a mile from Alnwick Castle, and we all have permission to go in there during daylight hours. Superb trees in there. And probably the best of all in this area, about 4 miles to the east of Alnwick, toward the coast and the North Sea, we have Howick Hall. And Howick Hall Arboretum comprises of, it's almost like walking through a map of the world, looking at the different trees, the countries they've come from. Because over the last 2 or 3 decades especially, Lord Howick and other people from horticultural and arboricultural establishments have gone out to China, North America and other points around the world and collected seed, germinated the seed back here and then got it growing Howick Hall. So there's real range of trees in there, really worth a visit. This is happening in our gardens as well. People love the idea around here of the fall, or before the fall, in autumn. Look at those beautiful trees. I've got some favourites. In Alnwick, for example, there's, I love the cercidifilum. Its common name is the burnt sugar tree. It's after about 25 years, the one I'm thinking of, is about 3 to 4 metres tall, that's all. And rounded leaves, ovalus type leaves, green during the summer, and then the beautiful change of colour from them, sort of pinky yellow there. And then when they fall, and they're generally the first to fall, first to show colour and the first to fall in this area, when they fall, I scoop up a handful, between two hands, rub it and take a deep in breath, sniff it in, and it just smells like burnt sugar. The surprises we get. Another one I love is the Claditsia. It has a compound leaf and a beautiful plant with green leaves, of course. And at the moment, they're turning yellow. And in the sunshine, the change is just brilliant. And one of the favourites, real top favourite, is the I love the long botanical name, one the first I learnt, and probably I can always bring up whenever I need to, and that is Metasequoia glyptostroboides. That is the dawn redwood. It was thought to be extinct up to about until the 1900s, and someone found a fossil with its leaf imprints on them and thought, oh, it is extinct. And then mid-1940s, one was actually found growing in China. And since that one was propagated, it spread throughout the world, and we have some in Alnwick, and they have a gorgeous colour change at this time of year. And look at all the acers, for goodness sake, the maples. Oh, such colour range there. A beautiful 150 species, more or less, of maple, of acer, and goodness knows how many cultivars. And they're all different colours during the year, coloured leaves, and then a different colour change again just before the leaves fall. So a little more about those leaf fall, etc. shortly, and I'll leave you with that thought. And those leaves are so important. And that's a point I wish to make when I come back.
Back in the day, we had some unusual ideas about where birds disappeared to when migrating. It's remarkable how much we've learnt over time, and Tom Cadwallender's tracking bar-tailed godwits and the amazing journeys of our birds.
I'm sitting down on the Aln estuary on my most favourite seat, Tom's seat, as it's known by family and friends. That's another story, which we'll get into that at some point in the future. But I'm just sitting here. It's a glorious afternoon, and we've had a few really quite wet days, but this is a glorious afternoon. And I'm watching some widgeon, which are kind of ducks which have come down here to Northumberland to winter from really quite northern climates, Siberia and places like that. Quite hostile during the winter time. So they come here for their winter, so they've migrated here. I'm also on the estuary. There's about 250, 300 lapwings. And again, they've migrated here to kind of spend their winter. They've left sort of the far north, and they're going to spend some time here. But that kind of leads you into pondering about kind of migration and its kind of complexities. I've also been sort of picking up some flocks of redwings, which are winter thrushes, coming in over the last few days. And they will come across the North Sea to winter in the UK. But migration is just an incredibly complex kind of subject, and it's absolutely endlessly fascinating. And I just want to spend a bit of time just sort of mooching around kind of the whole concept of migration and how and what do we know about it, really. But really, the idea, the thought about migration has been kind of known about for an exceedingly long time. It's even quoted in the Bible, and you look at Jeremiah, and there's a lovely quote in there. And it starts with, "Yea, the stork in the heaven knoweth her appointed times, and the turtle dove and the crane and the swallow observe their time of their coming." So that gives you a hint that people really recognise that birds were kind of seasonal, and there was some migration going on, which indeed is quite fascinating. And since those early days, we've kind of we didn't really know very much about it, just it happened at certain times of the year. But in the last 150 odd years that we've kind of learned an awful lot more about it. And there was the early sort of bird marking schemes, they trying to figure out where they were coming from. And in fact, one of the earliest marking schemes was actually not far from here in Alnwick, Northumberland, by one of the early Percys trying to understand about woodcock and where they come from during the winter here. And quite seasonal, of course, because woodcock have been coming in just this last few days. But that kind of leads you on to sort of, what else do we know? And in those early kind of primitive times, if you like, in terms of our science, we kind of were just scraping back the surface. In fact, there was some thought that some of the early sort of ornithologists thought swallows wintered in the bottom of ponds. They would be seen in the autumn, sort of flying around ponds and getting into the reed beds to roost overnight, as we know now. But the thought was that they actually clambered down the reeds and into the pool, into the mud below, and that's where they would spend their winter. We know now, of course, through ringing, through putting metal bands on birds' legs, that they go down to South Africa for the winter time. And equally, in around that sort of time, there was this idea that birds actually wintered on the moon, of all places, for goodness sake. But actually, the thinking behind it was that they would set off, birds would set off on migration at a certain phase in the moon, and they would get there in times of the moon to be back in its full phase again, so they'd land in the right sort of time. In fact, there was some school of thought, even more bizarrely, that the birds transmogrified. For example, winter robins with their red breasts would be changed into summer redstarts with their red rumps and red tails. Kind of crazy to think about it, but really, they were primitive times. And we do now have the benefit of science sort of to explain all these things to us. And lots of work have been going on. And I just wanted to reference a couple of things which have caught my imagination in the last wee while. Yes, I've studied bird migration for kind of 50 plus years, and it still kind of really captures my thought processes. There's a species of wading bird called the bar-tailed godwit. Now, bar-tailed godwits, there is the population which winters in the UK, and they breed further north in the kind of the high Arctic. These are kind of almost curlew-sized wading birds, brown, but they've got quite straight bills, and the markings, there are bars on their tails, like the name suggests. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is there are certain populations will actually sort of come here to the UK to winter, but there is this one population that breeds in Alaska. And we know they winter in Eastern Australia and New Zealand. We know that through rigging recoveries. And we kind of thought, well, actually, yeah, fascinating. But how do they get there? The Pacific Ocean is a vast, vast body of water. And, yeah, how do they get there? They can't stop on the sea because they haven't got waterproof feathers and blah, blah. Goodness knows how it worked. But with the use of technology, we've now got sort of transmitters that's small enough to fit on the back of these birds. So they've got to be small enough that they don't affect their normal behaviours. Anyway, so we've got these little transmitters, these satellite transmitters on the back of these bar-tailed godwits. And guess what? They feed up quite voraciously, double their body size, and then they'll set off on this amazing migration down through the Pacific Ocean to get to Eastern Australia and New Zealand in one hop. So they will travel 7 days non-stop, covering something like 8,000 to 9,000 miles in one hop. Can you imagine that? And we know that because we've tracked them with these satellite devices. Absolutely outstanding, staggering. And it just fills you full of awe with these sort of things. And it makes me even more kind of interested in birds. But the most recent bit of information that's come out is another wading bird called a red-necked phalarope. It's an odd name, but let's just park that for a minute. We'll kind of think about that at some point in the future. But anyway, these wading birds, normally the received wisdom is that birds which breed on the east side of the Atlantic will travel down into Africa to winter. Birds on the west side of the Atlantic will travel through the Americas and winter in South America. Not the red-necked phalarope. These birds are breeding in the high Arctic. In fact, there were some birds breeding in Shetland, which is not the high Arctic, but it's kind of in the northern extremes of the UK. And these birds were marked again with satellite transmitters. And instead of travelling south as we expect them to do, they travelled west. So they travelled from Shetland across through Greenland into Arctic Canada to the west coast of North America, hitting Canada and travelling down through the western seaboard, through California, blah, 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 through Central America, down into northern South America, off the Galapagos Islands, to winter. Just confounding all of our knowledge. It is just incredible. This was groundbreaking knowledge. This is absolutely staggering stuff. And yes, and they returned. It wasn't just a one-off. These birds returned and they came back to breed in Shetland. So, goodness me, when we think about the kind of the wonders of the world, bird migration, in fact, migration generally, mammals do undertake these great migrations and insects and other creatures do as well. But my knowledge, my passion is birds, and I'm staggered by that. Even just talking about it now, I'm getting goosebumps on my hairs are standing up. I'm so sort of captivated by the whole thing. But anyway, I thought you might like to hear about that, be thrilled by it like I am. Thanks very much, folks, and I'll speak to you again sometime. Bye now.
The science of autumn's changes always fascinates me, and Tom's revelling this week in the multicoloured displays of autumn, and he's harvesting its treasures to make gardener's gold.
I often compare the change of colour in deciduous trees and shrubs as nature's firework display, because it has, in keeping with the fireworks, bangers and rockets and things we set off with a naked flame, it is but down to a chemical reaction as well. And the chemical reaction is started by changing weather conditions, shorter hours of daylight and a fall in temperature. This sparks it off for me and for the tree, of course. It gets the message that it has to reabsorb those special foods which are still present in the leaf before they're wasted. And another part of it, on each leaf, at the leaf base, where the stalk joins the stem of the parent plant, parent tree, shrub, whatever, then they start off, an abscission layer is started there. And that is a layer which begins to cut the tie between the whole leaf and its stalk and the tree itself or the shrub itself. And it's a rapid process, getting this food content out of the leaves and into the tree before the abscission layer forms. Some plants, like the beech hedge, it's really a deciduous tree, a beech or a beech hedge. But the abscission layer, because it hasn't had time to form and jettison the leaves, they hang on to the leaves until the point of spring all the way through winter. You hear them rustling, you see them, and it isn't quite perfect in the case of the beech tree, but it is in many of the other trees and shrubs. Those leaves, once they fall to the ground, and this is something that really, I confess, irritates me at times. The show's over, the autumn leaves, but they're loathed by some. Some people see them and think, oh, what a mess, I've got to clean that up. And, they do clutter pathways and access routes and so on. But come on, leave the leaves. They do no harm. I save them. They're worth their weight in gold as far as this garden is concerned. It's so wasteful to rake them up, brush them, or blow them into heaps and discard them without thought. Some people actually burn them. Can you imagine it? Not for me. So we add them to the compost facility, of course. An alternative, if they're leaves of amongst shrubs and they're covering the ground where the shrubs are or some ornamental plants are growing, leave them there. Why should you leave them there? Because they'll form a mulch in the short term, and in the long term you'll find earthworms will come up just as they do in a lawn, and they'll grab them and take them down below ground, and that's adding organic material to the soil, which is enriching the soil and the soil structure. So for goodness sake, leave them. What does leaf mould look like? How do you form leaf mould? Well, it's a fairly straightforward process, actually. One of the simplest, if you've got a small garden, is bag as many leaves as you can into a black bin liner, push them down, squeeze them down until you can't get another one in, but leave room to tie the top to make it secure. And then I use a hand fork, a little hand fork, garden hand fork, and I prod some holes in the side to let air in, because the process of composting must have some oxygen in there to support the beneficial organisms at work. And I leave it in some corner of the garden for a whole year. And after a year, you examine it and see if you can recognize some leaves still, or parts of leaves. Then it isn't finally done yet, because the true product at the end, leaf mould, it's just a lot of brown material, tiny bits, and you don't recognize leaves amongst it. It's fully composted. Some people make a compost, put them in the compost facility. Some pile them in a heap. When you've got them, use them to mulch your garden. Use them to suppress weeds. Dig them into the garden. They haven't got a high content of nutrients in them, not the same amount as, say, cow manure and horse manure, but my goodness, they're top class for encouraging the structure, soil structure in the soil, and turning into humus. First class indeed. And of course, peat is going to be phased out fairly soon in this country. So what alternatives have we got? What an alternative that is. Leaf mould. Gorgeous. Don't waste it. Recycle it. Compost it. Don't burn it. Don't throw it away. It's worth its weight in gold.
Now for a bit of a first on the Weekending Show and the podcast. A message to inspire us from across the pond, and a very timely one at that, listening to the two Toms talking about gardens and birds. Here's naturalist David Mizejewski from the National Wildlife Federation in the USA, and some very good reasons why you should leave the leaves. Hello, and a very hearty Northumbrian welcome to the show, David.
Hi, Carl. Greetings from Maplewood, New Jersey, here in the U.S. The National Wildlife Federation has designated the month of October as Leave the Leaves Month. And the reason that a wildlife conservation organization is so interested in encouraging people to leave their fallen leaves at this time of the year, first and foremost, is because that natural layer of fallen leaves that forms every autumn is actually really important wildlife habitat, notably for insects and other invertebrates. Now, we tend to not think of the bugs as wildlife, but they actually are, and they happen to be a group of wildlife that, number one, is really, really important for the functioning of our ecosystems, but it's also a group of wildlife that really stands to benefit by how we choose to maintain our own piece of the earth, which is our own gardens and yards and landscapes throughout our cities, towns, and neighborhoods. And so what kinds of wildlife and insects in particular, or invertebrates, are using the leaf layer? Well, think of things like earthworms, think of things like isopods. All sorts of little invertebrates are living in that leaf layer, composting it, eating it, recycling it into good, rich soil for your plants. There's a couple of other kinds of insects that I really want to spotlight, though, because a lot of folks don't realize that they rely on the natural leaf layer. And the first of them are bumblebees. Bumblebee queens in the fall, as their hives are declining, they'll mate and they will go and they will bury themselves underneath the leaf layer in little burrows, and that's where they spend the winter. So without that natural leaf layer, our bumblebee queens don't have the habitat that they need to get through the cold months. The other one that really surprises people are butterflies and moths. Many species of moths in particular spend the winter as pupa in that leaf layer. In some places here in the US, 94% of moth species do this. They drop off their caterpillar host plants once they pupate, and they end up in the leaf layer underneath those trees or other plants. And so again, without that natural leaf layer, we pretty much don't have what these really important pollinators need to survive. And even if you don't care so much about the insects, the bees and the moths and things like that, think of this. Most of our backyard birds rely on a steady diet of insects as the sole food source for their babies come spring. So if you throw away all of your leaves now, you're literally wiping out entire populations of pollinators like moths, like bees, like all the other really important invertebrates. And you're also robbing those baby birds next spring of their only food source. So keeping those leaves on your property, in your garden, is a really good thing to do. And there's all sorts of other wildlife that rely on that leaf layer as well. Amphibians like toads and salamanders, small mammals like shrews and weasels and things like that are living and hunting in that leaf layer. So, and again, birds too. Birds are foraging in it as well. So lots and lots of wildlife depend on that leaf layer. And so the more folks can keep it, the better. And here's the thing. It's a free resource. Rather than spend your autumn weekends raking or leaf blowing away all of those leaves and throwing them away, you can keep them and use them as free natural mulch and fertilizer. Think about it. The trees drop their leaves where they cover the roots out of the plant, retaining soil moisture, suppressing weeds, and slowly composting down, returning their nutrients right to the root zone. It's mulch and fertilizer, and it's free. So that's why the National Wildlife Federation is really encouraging folks to keep those leaves on your property, move them into your landscaping beds, just like you would any other kind of mulch, water them down a little bit so they don't blow away, and you'll be doing your part on the local level to make sure that we have some good wildlife habitat right within our neighborhoods that can support our wildlife neighbors that can live in harmony with us. And you'll also be recycling, and that's a good thing as well. So I hope everybody out there is inspired to leave the leaves this year and keep them around year round. They really do have benefits.
Well, Tom Cad's been doing south and looking at why urban gardens and green spaces are so important for birds. It's a lovely piece this, though I should flag up a wonderful F word that's coming up. Yes, I think for the first time on the show we get to hear the word thirtling as the winter thrushes appear. Over to you, Tom Cadwallender.
Last week, Muriel and I were invited to quite a prestigious event. It was a BTO event, the British Trust for Ornithology. It was part of their awards process with the Marsh charity. And it was held in the Mall Galleries, and it coincided with the launch of the annual exhibition of the Society of Wildlife Artists. And it was absolutely fantastic. So yes, we got a chance to go down to the big city of London. And during that time, we kind of stayed with friends in Surbiton in kind of just southwest London. And really, that whole process just reminded me of how important urban and suburban gardens are to our wildlife, because the gardens and parks that we have around us, you know, they're kind of open spaces, and they're a great sort of resource for wildlife. And we kind of, sometimes we forget that. And some survey work carried out by the BTO through their garden birdwatch scheme, you know, they've discovered that these gardens and parks occupy something like, I don't know, 70% of our wildlife habitat in the country. And that's really incredibly important. I might have exaggerated the number, by the way, but that's not the point. The point is it is very, very important, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. And there are annual surveys going on. You know, the RSPB do a big garden bird watch every year, and that gives us a snapshot into the populations of birds and other wildlife that are visiting our gardens. But the BTO, the British Trust Fauna Authority, they run a weekly survey, and it's a garden bird watch, and it's the where people get a chance to record in their gardens every 5 days, and feeding into a much more detailed look at the wildlife and birds, particularly using our gardens. And all sorts of gardens are involved in this, whether they're large, medium or small. It doesn't really matter. They're all kind of part of that great wildlife resource. And it's at this time of year that you kind of figure that our gardens and parks are so darn important for our birds. And you know, birds is my kind of big deal, and I'm really, it kind of it's my core being, if you like. And at this time of year, into the autumn, we're seeing a lot of birds coming across from Scandinavia. They're making the journey across the North Sea. It's an annual pilgrimage to spend their winter away from the much more hostile northern climes, and believe it or not, coming to spend their winter in Britain, which I suppose are much more benign winter conditions. But yes, we're seeing big numbers of redwings, fieldfares, to a certain extent blackbirds and song thrushes and mistle thrushes coming over. These collectively are known as the winter thrushes, and they will use our gardens quite readily. And we're all familiar with blackbirds and song thrushes, and to an extent mistle thrush, which has an interesting sort of winter sort of kind of persona, because they will actually take up territory and they'll guard big holly bushes which are laden with berries, kind of with their lives almost. And it's kind of crazy what they'll do. They'll do that, but that's what they do. So we've got those kind of thrushes which we're more familiar with, which are kind of UK breeding birds. But those breeding birds their populations are supplemented by birds coming across from Scandinavia. Now the redwing is very similar to our song thrush, about similar sort of size, about 6 inches long, but they've got a fantastic sort of pale, buffy coloured eye stripe, and as their name suggests, the underwing, they've got this flash of orange, which when they fly, they kind of show this. But they have this weeping noise, and you can perhaps hear them in the morning or the evenings, particularly in the autumn when they've kind of just crossed over, or they are crossing over the North Sea. They can come across in their hundreds. And fieldfares are much more brash in terms of their noise, because they'll chat as they go along, and they're kind of like they look a bit more like mistle thrushes, that sort of size as well, and they have a much greyer back to them, and they kind of a creamy wash to their fronts, very spotty. But these birds really add some kind of a lot of interest to our parks and gardens during the winter months. And you'll often see them feeding amongst the leaf litter that we see lying around the place, because there's all sorts of insect life still kind of lying in there. Some of it's dormant, some of it's still alive, depending on the temperature on the day. But there are grubs in there, there's all sorts of things. And you'll often see blackbirds feeding in there, flicking and digging away in amongst the leaf litter, and it's wonderful. And it's really quite an important resource. And of course, we've had these big blows, these storms coming through, and the leaves have been sort of cleared off the trees really quite remarkably, and they're piled deep in some places. But actually, to see a blackbird furtling through a pile of leaf litter is something. Just watch next time you get a chance. Just have a wee look and see what you think, and you'll see them kind of just very methodically working their way through a pile of leaf litter. To an extent, song thrushes will do that, but also we are seeing species which you wouldn't expect to come across in winter with us. Things like species like robins. You know, we're kind of familiar with robins. Well, perhaps not in the summertime, because they become quite secretive in the summertime, because they'll slip away into the wider countryside to breed. But in the in the winter time they'll become much more bold, and they'll come into our gardens and parks quite readily to be fed, and they're kind of used to humans feeding them. But a lot of the birds will come across from Scandinavia as well, supplement them. But anyway, back to the story. But it's our urban parks and gardens, and our suburban parks and gardens are a real vital resource to our wildlife in the wintertime. And we should be kind of rejoice in it, because they provide so much colour, and we should try to help them out in kind of tough times as well. So yes, I'm a great believer in the urban parks and gardens and suburban ones too. I live quite rurally, and our gardens are really quite important to all manner of things. So yes, it's great stuff. So yes, learn to appreciate your garden for wildlife, and hey, not go wrong then. Bye, folks.
And so, to the sound of War Blackbird, here's Tom with some things to be getting on with in the garden.
It's job for the week time, and let me begin by saying I totally agree with David in America. He's part of the National Wildlife Federation, who are trying to ensure that wildlife thrives in a rapidly changing world. His idea is leave the leaves, and I interpret this as certainly don't disband them, throw them away, use them, and if you find them in a natural setting, in a woodland, deciduous woodland, anything of that nature, where they've spent years and years forming a beautiful format pile, they will be supporting a diversity of microorganisms as well as insect life, etc. Do not collect from places such as that. Leave them in their natural setting. Now back to home and some of the ideas I'll be tackling this week. I'm planting my last potatoes for Christmas. 8 weeks to go. So I'm putting them into pots. I found potatoes in the cupboard which were bought about a month ago that have got little shoots on. I don't know what the variety is, but they're going into pots with some compost, and they're in the cold, that's the unheated greenhouse, and they'll get some growth on board through solar heat, and hopefully give us some smaller potatoes closer to Christmas. I'm bringing any plants that I value before the frost arrives in to the garden room, as many as I can get in. And it's my long period of grabbing stuff outside that's going to suffer from the frost and bring it inside if I can to protect it. If you can't move a plant outside in the garden, do something about it. Tie some bracken round. I know it looks unsightly. Tie some straw around it or something of that nature. If you planted something that's a bit frost tender, give it some protection for the first winter in your garden. If you can't move it, protect it in situ. I'm pruning any shrubs that need it before the wind comes. One or two there, a buttlegia, for example, in the butterfly bush, it's gone from zero, about 30 centimetres tall, up to about over 2 meters anyway. And the wind will rock it, and that will loosen the root system. So I'm pruning that back to about a third of growth from the base, not deep down yet. And in March, I'll give it another 30 centimetres down, so it's just about 30 centimetres above base level. It needs it every year, and it'll grow up and give you flowers in July, August as usual. I'm doing that. Roses, some great long-stemmed roses, rather than prune those long stems on them if they're just in a border or a bed of roses. Try festooning, it works. If you take that long arch, that plant, that stem, and arch it over, down to the ground again, forming a sort of an arch or almost a circle, and tie it, attach it to a cane that you put in, and you'll find that it will send shoots out at every leaf joint along that arch, and you get some flowers. Try it for 1 year, and then you can prune it out if you wish afterwards. It works for me anyway. I'm also looking at the bulbs. It's bulb planting time. October, November, of course it is. It's nature's planting time. Buying bulbs, Get those bulbs into the ground. Don't leave them in a packet. They'll not do any good there. They might rot away. Put them into the soil. Let them get some roots started off, if not shoots, before the frost comes. Generally speaking, rule of thumb, I plant them up to about 1.5 times the length of the bulb. So let's say you have something like a narcissus, 10 centimeters from the base to the tip. I plant it so when it's planted in the hole, the tip of the bulb will be 15 centimeters below the surface of the soil. You know what I mean. You work that out for yourself. That's what I'm doing at the moment. I hope to do this week. But whatever you are doing, I've got to stress this again. Don't waste those leaves. If they're in a natural setting, leave them to support the wildlife there, the tiny, tiny wildlife. But if you got them from your own garden, they're yours. Compost them. Turn them into leaf mould. Whatever you're doing, enjoy your gardening in the coming week.
You've been listening to gardener Tom Pattinson, birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology, and David Mizejewski from the National Wildlife Federation in the USA. Don't forget you can listen back to all our previous programmes via the Nature Garden podcast. I'm Carl Steinson, thanks for listening and enjoy your gardening and time outdoors with nature. Bye for now.